Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is McKay Allen. I'm the Director of Content and Communications at Convirza, formerly known as Log My Calls. We're excited you're here today, and we're really excited for today's webinar with Fred Vallaeys. First, just a couple quick house cleaning items. Number one, people often ask who Convirza is and what do we do. You can see on your screen there, our goal is to help you optimize phone calls that you get for your business, just like you optimize clicks. And we do that in three ways. Number one, we help you attribute the phone calls to specific marketing channels and keywords and ads and campaigns, etc. So we marry calls to the specific marketing activity you're doing. Second thing we do is we analyze the calls themselves with voice recognition technology to extract really deep data from the call, so we can tell you whether or not the call resulted in an appointment or a reservation or a sale or whatever your goal is. And then the third thing we do is we provide automation. So true marketing automation for phone calls, first and only tool that does that. And then we host a lot of webinars. We host a couple webinars every week, and we do that because it's really useful information, and it helps us, of course. Helps you to know who we are without you really having a sales pitch leveled at you, right? But you know who we are through these webinars as well. So in terms of house cleaning items for today's webinar, the webinar is being recorded. We encourage you to ask questions in today's webinar. Fred's going to give his presentation. You can ask questions during that. I'll read those to Fred at the end of his presentation. We'll get through as many as we can. So to make sure you know where that question area is, why don't you do this? Type in the little question area where you're calling in from today geographically. So what location are you calling in from today? What city? I'll start out. I'm calling in from Salt Lake City. That's where Convirza's headquarters are. Fred, I believe, is in the Silicon Valley today. Fred, or are you traveling?
No, today I'm at the office in Palo Alto, California.
Awesome, at the heart of it all in Palo Alto. Good stuff. I'm in Salt Lake City, as I said. We got a lot of people on the call today. We've got Missouri, New Jersey, Tampa, State College, PA, go Nittany Lions, Boston, Topeka, Edmonton, Wisconsin, Irvine, Tampa, Atlanta, Amsterdam, San Diego, Buffalo, the UK. Andrew in the UK says he's a huge Optimizer fan with an exclamation point. So that's great.
Thanks, Andrew.
And it was in a British accent that he typed that, so that makes it even better. San Antonio, all over the place. La Jolla, Robert, you live in a good place, man. You must make a lot of money to live in La Jolla, though. Not as much as Fred living in Palo Alto, but Sao Paulo, LA, we're all over the map today. That's good. All right, everybody, thanks for doing that. It's exciting to see where everybody's calling in from today. Fred, today, if you received our email about today's webinar, you probably recognize Fred's name. He was one of the first employees at Google. He really helped them develop AdWords, specifically relating to the quality score when he worked at Google. Since then, he's broken off and started his own company called Optimizer, and he just does a great job. He's done a bunch of webinars with us, and we're really, really excited that he's agreed to do another one today. He's going to talk today about some of the recent changes Google has made to their quality score, and the really important changes. And so we're excited to have Fred Vallaeys on the webinar today. And he was teasing me about the picture we used on the landing page, so I'm sorry about that picture, Fred. We're sorry. We'll try to find a better one next time.
That's all right, McKay. Like you said, I look kind of like an accountant in that picture. And maybe
a little bit. If you want to do my taxes, you can.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, I'm going to be talking about quality score, so I guess there's some money involved in that.
That's exactly right. So we can see your screen and it looks good, Fred, so we're good.
Awesome. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us. I know some of these invitations went out a little bit last minute. The agenda was a bit in flux. But I'm going to be talking about quality score. And now quality score is a topic I talk about quite frequently. So many of you have probably seen some of these slides before. But the reason I decided to go with this topic is that Google announced a quality score change about 2-3 weeks ago. And it was sort of flying under the radar. They just posted it on Google+. But because we have a quality score tool that we use at Optimizer that we make available through Optimizer, we actually have quite a bit of data for some of the accounts that we manage. So I wanted to share what we've seen, and maybe you've seen some similar things, maybe some different things. So definitely look forward to the Q&A towards the end to kind of compare notes and see what's really been happening at Google. So McKay introduced me. I used to be at Google for 10 years, was Google's AdWords evangelist. Nowadays, I write for Search Engine Land. I write for PPC Hero. I've got my own company. It's called Optimizer. We make tools to make agencies more efficient when they do PPC management. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to my personal email right there, Frederick at Optimizer, or also follow me at Silicon Vallaeys on Twitter. So a little bit about Optimizer very quickly. We have enhanced scripts. So anyone who does AdWords scripts, we make those a little bit easier to use. We do advanced automated reporting that you can share with clients or with your management. We have beautiful visualizations for data insights, and Quality Score is one of those visualizations where we make data accessible and easy to understand. That may have been a little bit harder to do through AdWords directly. And we also make changes in your account, so we can do one-click optimizations, for example, helping you find new keywords that seem to be relevant to your business. Now, what I want to talk about today is first, what is Quality Score? How does Google calculate it? And then how do you make it better? And then we'll have time for a Q&A. And like I said, throughout the presentation, I have a couple of nuggets of some of the newer stuff based on the changes that happened 2 weeks ago, and I'll point those out specifically when we get to them. So first of all, what is Quality Score? Well, Quality Score is kind of like a cow. And that's kind of a strange thing, right? So why is there a cow here on this picture when we're talking about Quality Score? And it's because the cow represents the wisdom of the crowds. In the early 1900s, there was this guy by the name of Sir Francis Galton. He was actually one of the people who came up with some terms and like correlation, and he was very involved in statistics. But he was a scientist at heart, so he did a lot of different things. But one of the things he's famous for is sort of explaining the whole notion of the wisdom of the crowds. And actually, it's been around since Greek times. But what he did is he went to a county fair. One of the common games people play at a county fair is they have a piece of livestock, whether it be a pig or a cow, and then they ask people to guess the weight of that piece of livestock. And whoever gets it the closest, they sometimes get to take that piece of livestock home. That was back in the old days. Nowadays, I bet you get a different prize because I sure wouldn't want to take a cow to my house. But what he found was that by averaging the guesses of all the people who had submitted a guess, that was actually closer to the correct answer than any individual had guessed themselves. And that was interesting because you had all of these experts like butchers, farmers, people who presumably really should know the weight of a cow, yet they couldn't get as close to the real answer as the average that included everybody's guess, from a housewife to the kids to a butcher and a farmer. And so that was the whole notion of the wisdom of the crowds. Now, why is that important in the context of a presentation about Google? And that's because Google does the same thing. When it comes to Quality Score is really nothing besides the wisdom of the crowds. And let me explain that to you. So me, when I joined Google back in 2002, one of the things I could do was go into what was called the approval bin, and I could see all of the keywords that advertisers had submitted. And I, as one individual, could make a judgment and say that keyword is not relevant, hence I am going to disapprove it. Now obviously that's not great, right? So there's certainly some keywords where I can make that judgment, but say we're talking about plumbing and specific gaskets. Well, you know, I don't know what the right keywords would be for something as specific as that, right? I'm not an expert in every area. So what Google decided to do was take the wisdom of the crowds and measure the relevance of ads through the votes, i.e. the clicks, from everybody looking at the search results pages. So people voted for good ads by clicking on them, the click-through rate, right? For every time the ad is shown, how many clicks does it get? That is a measure of relevance. Now, the other thing to bring up here is, why does Google have Quality Score in the first place? Well, if you think back to about a decade ago, slightly over a decade ago, online advertising was in a dismal state. Nobody was making money doing this, and the reason was that you had all these punch the monkey ads, you had all these ads that had nothing to do with what you were trying to achieve as a user. So these ads were interrupting what you were trying to do. Hence, people didn't like them. They started installing ad blockers, and so this whole ecosystem was broken. Publishers like Yahoo weren't making money. Users were unhappy about the experience they had on the web. And this was bad, right? And advertisers had no way to connect with these consumers, when in fact many of these consumers actually would have welcomed a sales pitch when it was relevant to them. And so that's where Google came in, and we said, we're going to have Quality Score. And so it's aligning the incentives of the three parties in the advertising ecosystem. And by having a quality measure that factors into whether your ad can show up on the page and where it ranks on the page, Google was able to do the following. Google made sure that users, when they saw an ad, it was relevant. Oftentimes back in a couple of years ago, you would ask people, who here has never clicked on an ad on Google? Well, when I asked that for a live audience, half of the people would raise their hands. And I would look at them and I would be like, well, Google makes billions and billions of dollars. I know for a fact that all of you in this room have probably clicked on an ad. You just didn't think it was an ad because it was relevant. It was answering a question, right? So from the user's perspective, they look at ads, they click on ads, but they think it's a great experience because it's answering the question. For advertisers, this is great too, because now the advertiser can actually connect with someone who's looking for their service or their product at what we call the moment of relevance. And publishers, they also make money because if people are actually looking at these ads and clicking on these ads, that means they're monetizing. So everybody in this ecosystem is happy, but it's quality score that aligns the incentives. So that's why quality score exists. Now, let's bring it a little bit closer to home, right? So it's all good and well that Google makes money because of quality score, but how does it matter to us when we advertise? Well, quality score influences a number of things. And first of all, it starts with eligibility. So if you have a low quality score, your ad may not even be eligible to show up on the search results page. If you're not on the search results page, then everything else is a moot point because your ad's not there. But if you're eligible to show up, now we can talk about the ad rank. So are you going to be the ad in the number 1 position, or are you going to be the ad in the number 9 position, or are you the ad in the number 17 position showing up on the second page of search results? And then based on that rank, Google has a separate threshold for promoting ads to the top of the page. So if you're the number 2 ad and you additionally qualify for the top slot because you've met that certain threshold of quality, now your ad can show above the search results where it's probably going to get a much better click-through rate than if it was showing up on the right-hand side. And then, of course, based on rank, your price is determined. The higher your quality score component of the rank, the lower your price that you have to pay to maintain that position. We can also talk about DKI, dynamic keyword insertion. This is one of these catch-22 type things. Google doesn't allow you to use dynamic keyword insertion, or dynamic keyword insertion doesn't actually insert the keywords until Google thinks you have a high enough quality ad. Now, DKI, we all know, typically improves CTR, but you can't use it until you've proven that the ad, the static version of the ad, actually is relevant as measured by users and the click-through rates. And then depending on what position on the page you show up on, you can also be eligible for ad extensions. And ad extensions, Google's published plenty of numbers there, but these can have impacts of as much as a 20% increase in CTR literally by just adding something like a site link, which takes 2 minutes. So a 20% boost in the number of clicks you can get from something that simple, that's amazing, right? But you have to have a good enough quality score, a good enough ad rank to qualify for some of these things. And then really bringing it down to the money and the thing that, in all businesses we do care about, profits, right? You can see here in a chart from Optimizer that on the blue line, the quality score for this advertiser drops. It kind of goes up and down, and then it stays at a lower level. And you can see in response to that, the cost per click that they have to pay does go up significantly. And then after a while, the advertiser probably noticed, oh, whoops, I'm paying more money, so maybe I should do something about it. And so maybe they lower their bids after a couple of weeks there, and the CPC goes back down. But you can see how the two are very closely related, quality score and CPC. So there's a little bit more of that detail. Okay, so as far as what is the CPC that you pay, that's part of the ad ranking formula. So the ad ranking formula has changed over a number of years. Back in 2001, that's right before I joined Google, it was very simple. It was click-through rate multiplied by the maximum bid. That was your ad rank. There's no simpler formula than that, right? So it literally says if your CTR is double, then you only have to bid half as much to maintain the same ad rank. So literally by doubling your quality score, you pay half as much to maintain your position. Okay, so then in 2005, Google changed it up a bit, and they still kept it a simple multiplication, but instead of saying CTR was the factor, they said quality score is now the factor. And so quality score enabled them to do something very interesting. So instead of looking at historical CTR, they could look at predicted CTR. So they could start looking at all these factors that they knew, and they started building an artificial intelligence system, a learning mechanism, a learning system. And so it wouldn't just look at what happened historically, but it would say, based on what happened historically, what do we expect to happen in this specific auction, with this search, with this user at this time of the day? And they would use that as a factor in ad rank. Now, eventually, Google in 2015 changed the formula a bit again, and they said now it's no longer a straight-up multiplication, but now it's going to be a factor of 3 things. Still your maximum bid, still your quality score, but now the ad extension also plays into ad ranking. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, right? So some people think the ad extension is part of quality score, and no, technically it's not really part of that. However, it plays the same kind of role, because the reason we talk about quality score is because we talk about ad rank and CPC. So it's part of that little triumvirate at this point of the things that determine what your ad rank and your price is going to be. Okay, so up until this point, I've covered stuff that many of you may have seen before, but now let's go into the new stuff. So I believe it was July 27 or 28, it was on July 28th, Google made an announcement on Google+, and they said the following. This is a quote from their post. It said, the most significant part of the change is that keywords without traffic will now by default receive a quality score of 6, an average for the 3 subcomponents of quality score. Once those keywords gather enough impressions, the scores will update in about a day or so. Okay, so that was interesting. So we looked inside of Optimizer at the historical quality score tracker, and we noticed that the quality score actually changed a day before Google made the announcement. And so that made sense. They probably put in place the system one day, and then when they figured, okay, it's completely launched, then they made the announcement to say, we've just changed something. Now, let's deconstruct a little bit what that statement means, because Google positioned it as this is not a very big change, and maybe it isn't, but it did have some sort of an impact on accounts. And here's another chart from Optimizer. So this shows the number of keywords before Google's announcement and after Google's announcement at different levels of quality score. The dark bars that you see, so the dark colors, that's the number of keywords at each of those levels of quality score after the change. The lightly colored bar, that's before, right? So if you look at the number 6 here, you see that the number of keywords with a quality score of 6 has dramatically increased. Whereas in this particular account, they used to have a decent number of quality score 10, 9, and 8 keywords, and those have all decreased. So basically what's happened is there's been a move towards the average. The new average quality score is a 6. And so there's been other studies done where people have said back in the day the average quality score used to be 7, now maybe it was closer to a 5. Well, based on this announcement by Google and based on what we're seeing, the average quality score is very clearly a 6. Right? So 7 used to be considered average, nowadays it's more 6 as an average. Now, and actually the final thing I'll point out on this slide is because you get some of these keywords moving towards the average, there is a little bit of an impact on the price as well. So for this particular advertiser, because new keywords tended to get a higher quality score to start off with, they had to pay less to maintain their position. So for this advertiser, the cost has actually gone up a little bit as a result of this change. Now on the flip side, if you have an advertiser who tended to get really low quality scores for new keywords, 2s and 3s and 4s, those 2s and 3s and 4s have now shifted to 6s, so they actually get the benefit of a lower cost per click. So it's not like a unilateral move in one direction. It depends on how Google considered your performance to be in the past. If they thought you were really good, now it's going to be more expensive. If they thought you were typically a bad advertiser, now it's going to be a little bit cheaper to start with new keywords. Now, we also started analyzing some data. So as Optimizer, we wanted to figure out what is the correlation between CPC and quality score. Right? So if I go from a quality score of a 6 to a 7, how much does that save me in terms of CPC? And the same question obviously for any other movement between 2 different quality scores. So we started pulling that data, and we weren't really looking for this, but the first interesting thing that we saw was that 75% of keywords And actually, so it's probably more like 71%. I should have updated that in the slide, but you can see the actual numbers at each quality score. But you can see that around 70% of keywords that have a change in quality score have no associated change in first page bid. That's really interesting, right? So it tells me that the first page bid estimate that you see in your account is not in sync with the quality scores that you see in your account. Now, the reason that I thought that was interesting is that Google has some flexible bid strategies, right? Some automated bid strategies that you can set through Google that rely on the first page bid estimate. If that first page bid estimate is not completely up to date, then you may be overbidding or underbidding. And when I was working with the agency SalesX, we actually saw that. We had some bid rules that were just targeting first page bid, and when we put in the first page bid, oftentimes we found that those first page bids were not close to reality at all, to the current reality. So oftentimes we didn't make it to the first page of results, so we had to increase above that first page bid estimate to ensure that we were actually on that first page. But so that kind of explains what may be happening here. There's a bit of a lag between the first page bid estimate and when the quality score is updated. Now, the other point to make here is the quality score that you see in the account is not linear. So what I mean is if you go from a quality score number of 4 to a quality score number of 8, that does not mean that your ad rank, in fact, doubles. The numbers 1 through 10, these are just a representation that Google gives you. So there have been a number of studies published. Here's one from Click Equations, and here's one from WordStream. And the basic argument that these make, which I believe to be faulty, is that if you go from a quality score of 2 to 4, you're doubling your quality score, hence you are decreasing the amount you have to pay by half, right? That's not how it works. The impact of going from a 2 to a 4 is not the same as going from a 4 to an 8. These could be very, very different. Now let me explain that. So if you look at this chart here, what it's showing is that at every bucket of quality score, which you see on the horizontal, the x-axis here, at every level of that could correspond to a different predicted CTR. Predicted CTR, of course, being the machine learning system that looks at historical CTR to predict what your future CTR will be for each and every query. Now, what you notice here in this example, and this is just an example that I've made up, right? So this is not the actual numbers, but I think it illustrates what's happening, is that when you go from a quality score of a 1 to a 2, there's a much smaller increase in predicted CTR that goes along with that. Whereas if you go from a quality score of a 6 to a 7, there's a huge gap in what that predicted CTR is all about. Now keep in mind, Google is going to use the predicted CTR in the formula that determines the cost per click. They don't actually use the number 1 through 10. The number 1 through 10 is just a representation of an underlying number, which is PCTR, and the PCTR is the thing that actually matters from Google's perspective when it comes to ranking and pricing. So the other thing that we started finding is that if you're at a quality score of 5 or below, you're below average. And so the price, the first page bid estimate, tends to be largely due to the competitive nature of the auction. So basically it's saying if you want to even participate on this page, you have to get to some sort of a minimum, and we don't even care that much if you're at a quality score of a 2 or a 4. Your price, your minimum price, is basically determined by that page and the competition on it. What we did see is that once you went above a quality score of 6 or above, then your first page bid is much more dependent on the quality score, and you can actually see some pretty nice gains from increasing your quality score. And that again also speaks to the fact that there's a bigger gap here, right? So if you see you go from a quality score 6 to a quality score of 7, you've really dramatically had to increase your predicted CTR, so you expect that your actual cost would go down much more than if you made a teeny tiny little jump going from a 1 to a 2, where the slope is much flatter, and so the monetary impact is not as big. So 2 quick slides to again illustrate this, but here we looked at what is the average first page bid change when your quality score falls by 2. And we see sort of that cutoff around the 6, so I've drawn the line right there, but any numbers below that 6, so on the top of the screen, there's not that big of a change to your first page bid estimate, whereas if you're at a 6 or above, then you do see those much larger impacts to cost per click. But we visualize that a different way, and this is where quality score had dropped by 1 point. And again, you see that there's a much greater range of higher numbers when you look at quality scores of 6 or above. Right? If you look at the lower quality scores, they tend to be clustered closer to very minimal changes, whereas, you do see some outliers, right? You see some huge jumps in first page bid, but we wanted to look at where the chart was pretty dense. And so when you look at a 6 to a 10 quality score, you do see those changes in first page bid, and actual CPC are much smaller, are much larger. Okay, so that was some of the new stuff. So now let's go back to some of the stuff we've talked about before, but I think it's still important to kind of repeat it. So how is quality score calculated by Google? So first of all, keep in mind there are different flavors of quality score. Google understands your quality score for a search result, for a content network page, so a page on the Google Display Network. They have a separate quality score for mobile. They have different quality scores for each search partner. So kind of the base level of what you see in your account, number 1 through 10, that comes from the impressions that you get on mobile and desktop on Google search. No partners, no search partners, no Google Display Network, just on Google search. But then, of course, when your ad is running on a search partner, then you have a different quality score, but that's not reflected in the number that you see in the account. And that's a little bit of the obfuscation that makes it tricky sometimes to understand what's happening, because Google only shows you one of the numbers when, in fact, there's many different numbers that they employ. Now, the other thing, and kind of repeating what I said before, but this is one of the most important points, is that what you see in the account is not what you get. So the quality score number that you may see in the account for blue widgets, when it says quality score 7, well, that's just an approximation of how Google expects the keyword to perform. The actual numbers that they use for the sake of ranking you in the auction is what you see in the right box. So here they understand your keyword is blue widgets, but they understand that the query has some attributes to it, like maybe a different search term was typed in, maybe different time of day, maybe different locations. And so on the back end, what they care about is what is the predictive CTR in that instance, and that might be 15%, and that's the number that matters for ranking and pricing. So when you ask Google what matters for quality score, they're going to tell you 3 things: click-through rate, relevancy, and landing page. And let me go into each one in a bit more detail. So number 1, quality score is mostly a factor of click-through rate. You can look at videos by Hal Varian, Google's chief economist, and probably some videos I did a really long time ago, but basically CTR, remember historically, quality score was CTR. When Google started moving away from this, it was called quality score, but it was still really based on CTR, and I'll explain why that really makes sense in just 2 or 3 slides. But basically, Google, when they look at CTR, they want to look at the CTR of different components. So they want to look at a keyword. How has that keyword historically performed across the whole system, right? So if a whole bunch of people have tried on that advertising on that keyword and they've all had really bad CTRs and really bad quality score, Google may make the assumption that when you try that keyword, you're also not going to be doing great on it because they have all of this historical data from across the whole AdWords system. Now, they can also weigh in the fact that your account level quality score maybe is better than the average advertiser. And so in that case, they might say, well, because you're typically a better than average advertiser, even though we don't think you're going to do great on this keyword, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and we're going to, give you a higher quality score because we think, based on your history, you tend to do better. Now, factor number 3 that you see on that slide, that's the combination between the keyword and the ad text. That's really the most important. As soon as Google has enough data about this factor, that's what they care about, because that's specifically how does your keyword in the account do with your ad and your display URL that you've put in. Once they have that data, that's what they want to use. Now, what's important here too is I don't mention anything about campaign. I don't mention anything about ad group. So these are structural elements of your account, but they don't factor into the quality score calculation. Obviously, ad group is what defines the relationship of number 3 on there, the keyword to the ad. So yes, the ad group is what you use to make sure the right ad shows for the right keyword, but if you were to put that same keyword and the same ad in a different ad group, Google doesn't care. They don't look at, oh, the ad group has changed, therefore we need to recalculate this whole thing. They care about the combination between these 2 factors. Now, the other thing then, and this is new, this is based on Google's recent update. So when Google said this is not really affecting very much, I don't fully believe that's true. So what they're basically saying, what they kind of suggested was that only new keywords would be affected by this. So if you were adding a new keyword, it would start off at a quality score of 6 as opposed to some estimate that Google would have done in the past. Now, it turns out that even after one impression, Google may still consider your ad, your keyword, to be new because they don't have enough data to figure out if it's really should be a 6 or if it should be some other number. So we ran the data across some of the accounts that we have, and we looked at how likely is it that your quality score will change after certain levels of impressions. So after one impression, between 1 and 10 impressions, you see that there's a large decrease in the number of keywords with a quality score of 6. And that slope keeps decreasing until you get to about 100 impressions right here. And then at 100 impressions, the slope becomes much flatter. So this is to say that even after 100 impressions, there's still going to be some flux in the number of keywords that go from a quality score 6 to some other quality score, but it's much less likely to happen than if you've had fewer than 100 impressions. So the way that I'm reading this is that there's kind of a threshold at about 100 impressions, after which you can say, well, Google probably understands my performance pretty well, so if I'm still at a quality score 6, chances are I'm going to stay at that quality score of 6. If they've moved me to a quality score of 8, then that's probably based on some pretty good data, and I can trust that that shouldn't change too much, too dramatically. Okay, so now the other point I'll make here is the threshold we see at 100 impressions doesn't mean that Google doesn't often know much sooner. So if there's enough related data that Google has, they may be able to tell after just 1 impression or 10 impressions that your quality score is going to be very different. But we see that in the longest, the most conservative case, it takes up to 100 impressions for Google to really know. Now, when Google says they look at click-through rate, keep in mind too that Google looks at exact match click-through rates for reporting. And so this table here shows you if you had the keyword blue widgets and somebody was searching for blue widgets, then that is impacting the quality score number 1 to 10 that you see in the account. It also, of course, impacts the real-time quality score for a search on that. But the moment that the user puts in some additional words in the query, like buy or for free, now the CTR performance of that no longer impacts the number 1 through 10 you see in the account, but it does get saved so that Google can use it for future auctions where the search is very similar to that. And that leads us into the real-time relevancy signals. This is often when people say, well, Google's doing a lot of hand waving and they're trying to hide what they're actually doing. Like, what is real-time relevancy? And it's actually not, it's mostly based on CTR. It's not really that mysterious in many ways. The mystery is in how is Google slicing and dicing the CTRs that they look at. But fundamentally what they want to do, and which I think is really the right thing to do, is they say each auction, each search that happens has different attributes. The person doing the search is different. The location where they're coming from is different. The relationship between where the searcher is located and the country where the advertisers are located, that could be different. The device they're using is different. So all of these attributes at the time of the auction give Google some additional insight into what may actually happen in terms of click-through rates, right? So if somebody's on a mobile device and they're looking for a pizza shop and there happens to be one very close, well then that's probably a more relevant result than if you were based in a different state. So these are the types of things Google can look at. It's really CTR focused. So and I think maybe the build on this slide is a little broken, so let me just fill this out. But basically here, the point that I want to make is that better quality score equals more revenue for Google. So Google has a cost per click advertising system, and they use quality score for ranking. Now, what a lot of people miss out on, and this is kind of an obvious understanding after I explain it, but the quality score means that Google is effectively doing a cost per impression auction. And don't look at the slide yet, so it's a little confusing. Let me explain this differently. So as a company like Google, you're a public company, right? So you're measured on revenue. Now, as a public company, the way that you typically would double your revenue is by having twice as many people doing searches. Now, that would have held true in a cost per impression type system. So you get compensated by advertisers every single time somebody loads a page. But Google, remember, did away with the whole cost per impression system. They said we're going to use quality score and cost per click instead. Now, the brilliant thing is that if you look at those two factors, dollars per click, now you look at the slide, that actually is your maximum cost per click. And clicks per impression, that's actually your CTR, and that's largely quality score today. So if you multiply these two, you effectively get CPM. So the ad rank is a cost per impression auction. So that's the beauty for Google, right? And it also explains why CTR is such an important component to Google, because if you look at CTR, if your CTR doubles, Google makes twice as much money from that same auction. So that's why I think CTR is really that main component of quality score. Now, the final part, Google does consider landing page as part of the quality score, but in fact, that's a small difference. And so here we have two landing pages for e-commerce websites, pretty well-known ones, and the question is, which of these is better? And so at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, right? So Google's not trying to judge eBay versus Amazon, but what they are trying to do is weed out really low quality experiences. So maybe scammers who are trying to steal personal data, maybe people who promise, hey, we'll give you an iPad if you refer 5 of your friends. Maybe these are thin landing pages, doorway pages that eventually lead to eBay. So now they've just introduced a number of additional clicks. These are then often affiliates, but they've introduced additional clicks. And that's the kind of stuff Google wants to go after. They don't want to have these poor landing page experiences, but at the same time, when it comes to really great websites like Amazon and eBay, and hopefully many of your websites that are not doing anything sketchy, Google doesn't really care that much, and the landing page does not factor in significantly. Now, not technically part of QS, but let's talk about it anyway, because when Google announced that ad extensions were going to be part of the ad ranking formula, people kind of freaked out and they said, oh, does that mean I must enable every single ad extension, or otherwise I'm going to have a really poor ad rank? And that's not what it means, right? So, but it does make sense for Google to look at which ad extensions you're using, because they do have a huge impact on click-through rate. And obviously, like I said, click-through rate is such a huge impact on revenue, on cost per impression, also on your price and CPC. So it makes sense for Google to factor in the improvement in click-through rate that's generated by adding ad extensions. But do not add ad extensions to your account when they don't make sense. So if you're a fully e-commerce business and you don't want people calling you, don't feel like you must add a call extension just to be on a level playing field. Now, if all of your competitors for those same keywords for some reason do have a call extension, then maybe it's time to consider if you should be doing the same thing, because that could be driving additional CTR to them, which is going to give them a higher rank in the formula, or a higher ad rank. Okay, so measuring and improving quality score. This is the final section here before we go into questions, but and this is the simple stuff, right? So as far as seeing your quality score, remember, you just have to turn on the quality score column in your account. Now the downside is quality score is an attribute. It's not a metric. And that sounds like semantics, but the reason it's important is that an attribute is a real-time thing. So if I look at my quality score for a keyword, I'm looking at the quality score at this instance in time. This is what Google currently has for that keyword. Even if I set my date range back, my quality score number is not going to change because it's an attribute. You're not looking at some historical number. And that's kind of painful because sometimes you do want to know what your historical quality score was. Now, the next thing is there are subcomponents of quality score. So anything from expected click-through rate to ad relevance to landing page experience. Google will tell you if they believe one of these factors to be above or below average for your account. So there are some tools here, some reporting tools like I believe Sweeto, and then our tool in Optimizer. We pull in the subcomponents, and as you can see in the top right of that slide, we'll tell you what is your account quality score, but we'll also tell you the impression weighted average of the ad relevance component. Kind of funny, when we try to do the same thing for the landing page experience component, but the Google API gives us back that every single landing page that our tool touches is just perfect. I suspect that's not true. I'd be very proud if it was, but we suspect that's not true, so that's why we don't include that metric, because it doesn't look like Google's giving the right data. Now, I've talked about account level quality score a bit, and so this is the factor that Google uses to figure out, are you typically better or worse as an advertiser, and that could influence your position. If you wanted to calculate that, you basically have to do an impression-weighted average for the whole account. And so there's 4 simple steps. Now, if you have a big account, that does get quite involved. So some of the ways that you could do this more easily is downloading these reports daily, so you have access to them as you need to look back at your historical quality score. Or you could use an AdWords script, and we've published a number of them. They're all free. You can just download them and install them in your account, and then you get account level quality scores. Or you could look at a tool. So we have a tool like Optimizer, or you have a tool like 10 Scores, which also gives you a historical quality score. But that gets to be useful after Google makes some change, right? So here you could see, okay, between one date and the next date. So here, you know, July 19th and July 26th, how has my quality score changed? So now you can see that it's gone as high as a 6.3 and as low as a 5.3, and it's currently at a 5.7. And you can even see the distribution of keywords at all the different levels, and for each campaign is color-coded to show you what the campaign level quality scores would be. And then again, like I said, this is useful because Google makes some announcement about quality scores changing. If you don't have any tracking in place, you literally don't know how this change impacted your account. Back in March, Google had a bug in quality score, and they announced they had a bug, but they didn't give you any way to know if you were impacted, how long the impact lasted, what the CPC impact was. And if you have a tool or you're tracking this in some way, now you can see, oh, well, here there's a nice boost in quality score in this account around sometime in June. And you can sort of average the CPCs on the orange line, and you can see that the CPC actually does tend to decline after that quality score jumps. So now you could even go to your stakeholders, your clients, your managers, and say, look, we improved quality score by 2 points, and it had a 20% impact on decreasing our cost for the same traffic. So if you want to optimize towards a better quality score, really the main question you have to ask yourself is, how do I get to have a better CTR, right? Quality score is not something that you can measure directly in the account, so look at CTR instead. So a couple of tips. Make tightly themed ad groups. So this is just to make the point that the keyword to the ad text relationship lives in the ad group. So if you have tightly themed ad groups, you're typically going to get a better CTR. Have multiple ad texts in each ad group, and use a compelling call to action, and then use elements that boost CTR, like using trademark signs, using your brand. Use the tricks that get people to click more on the ad. Of course, don't do it to the detriment of your conversion rate, right? You want to balance conversion rate and quality score to make sure that your return on ad spend or your cost per acquisition numbers are meeting your targets. Separately, use all of the ad extensions that make sense for your account. Again, this is not a direct impact to quality score, but it does impact your CPC, and I think that's ultimately what we care about. And then also make sure you fix your keywords that have lots of impressions and low CTR. So if you find your account has a lot of keywords but poor quality score, make sure you have some strategy of periodically cleaning those up. And that can be done through scripts, or it can even be done through a simple automated rule in AdWords that you run, say, once a day, and you say any keyword with a quality score less than a 5, automatically pause it. And you can use the same approach for long tail keywords. And so obviously if you have tens of thousands of keywords with low quality scores, in aggregate, that long tail could actually be contributing a large number of impressions to your account that also weigh down your account level quality score. So what does the ideal ad group look like? Well, somewhere between 5 and 30 closely related keywords. This is not the end-all be-all stat here. Like, I made that number up many years ago when I first gave a similar presentation, and it's sort of become a religion for some people that you must have between 5 and 30 keywords, and if you have 31, it's horrible. Well, that's not the case, right? The point here is, once you have somewhere around 30 keywords, chances are you can probably split up your ad group into a couple of different ad groups that have ad text more closely related to that new theme that you've created, and that's going to improve your CTR. There's no need to use different match types for the same keyword, right? Some people believe that by adding the same keyword in different match types, you're going to improve cost per clicks, they're going to improve quality scores, and that's not the case. This is not going to have any impact on your account. The only good reason to do this is if you want to have different bids for different match types. Use your brand keywords as keywords. So use your brands as keywords because obviously those tend to have really good CTRs. And then negative keywords don't matter for quality score. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be using negative keywords. I'm saying don't think that by adding a bunch of negative keywords, all of a sudden your quality score is going to improve. And that's because Google looks at the exact match variation of the keywords to determine quality score. When it comes to ads, have at least 2 variations. It's totally fine to use dynamic keyword insertion. Google will treat that as if the dynamic insertion was part of a static ad. Make sure you've enabled all your ad extensions, and then answer the user's need. I mean, keep in mind the reason ads on Google work is because they tend to look like information. They don't tend to look salesy. So make it very answer the user's question. And then display URL does matter, right? So the display URL is a portion of the ad that the user sees. That influences the CTR for that ad. The landing page that the user does not see through the display URL, so that matters less. That matters from a landing page quality perspective, but it's not going to influence the CTR. A couple of other best practices. So like we've seen, it takes up to about 100 impressions before Google really knows your real quality score. So give it up until about 100 impressions before you start freaking out when your quality score is maybe not where you'd like it to be. Getting to 100 impressions, sometimes that means bidding a little bit higher to be in those top positions to give Google more data more quickly about how you could perform. Now keep in mind, Google does position normalization on CTR. So obviously the ad in the top position could have a stellar CTR like 30%, whereas if you put the same ad on the right-hand side in the last position, that same ad could have a 2% CTR, so huge difference, right? While Google position normalizes, they understand that the ad in the top position will probably do better, and hence they normalize it based on sort of the system-wide data that they have. When you have bad quality score, optimize or delete those poor quality score keywords. Do not let them linger and hurt your account. And then feel free to do experimentation. Google is really good at maintaining data. So some people are afraid to experiment because they think they could screw up their account history. Well, that's not the case. If you find that your change is not working out the way you expected it to, you can undo it. You can go back to the old way, and Google will still have that historical data and typically return you pretty close to where you were at before you made those changes. And then one way to do optimizations there and with experimentation is use broad match keywords in your accounts to find new queries. And then if you find good queries that convert, you could add those to your account. And if you find poor queries, you can make those negatives. So one of the strategies there is called stick and peel, single keyword ad groups, alpha beta structure. If you haven't heard of these, they all basically refer to the same thing, but these are keyword management strategies that could be pretty useful. Now, at the end of the day, and this is my final slide, but come to terms with your quality score, right? So I have yet to attend an investor call of any sort where they talk about quality score. And actually, that's not true. I've attended Google investor calls, and they do talk about quality score once in a while, but there's no other company in the world that has quality score as a key performance indicator. You know, you care about profit, you care about revenue, and quality score is one lever that you have to achieve better results, but it's not the end-all, be-all metric. And so I've heard of plenty of cases of an advertiser who's got a keyword that just seems to be stuck forever at a quality score of 2, but it's making money. Right? Well, then don't fret over it. It's gonna be fine if you know, you try to improve it, but if you really can't and you're still making money, then you know, that's just something to live with. So quality score hopefully doesn't stress you out too much. So McKay, that's my final slide. I'll go into Q&A now. I'd love to answer any questions or hear from people what they've seen.
Awesome, Fred. Sorry, my mute was on and I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. But we're good now. Good presentation, Fred. That was awesome. We're getting a lot of good feedback coming over. We have the two most important questions that people always ask, so I'll just address those up front, are, is there a recording and can they get a copy of the presentation? The answer to both is yes. I'll have Fred send me his deck, and we can post that on SlideShare if that's okay with you, Fred.
Sure.
And then also we'll send the recording out via email tomorrow, so you'll have access to that. But probably more quickly and more importantly, you can actually just go to Convirza.com, go to Resources and Webinars, and you'll see a recording up there later today, so you can actually access it there as well. Okay, let's get into questions for just a few minutes, Fred, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay. So this is a good question, I think salient to the whole presentation. Scott asks, he says, can you explain a little more how Google makes more revenue when quality score improves? How does that help Google, and why ultimately, I guess that's why we should care about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Scott, I apologize that that one slide, that the whole build kind of got messed up there. Right, but so look at a typical online publisher. So assume for a second that Google is a publisher. They publish some content, and that happens to be searches for the most part. Now, the way that an online publisher makes money is by selling advertising on their website. Typically, historically, that has been sold on a cost per impression basis. So for every page that loads, they can show a number of ad units, and they get compensated regardless of whether the user clicks on those ads or not. It's cost per impression. Now, that was where the system was broken. You got all of these irrelevant ads, and so they weren't driving results. People weren't clicking on them. Advertisers were paying money, but they weren't getting results from it. So Google introduced Quality Score. Now, Quality Score and CPC pricing is a little bit scary from a publisher's perspective, because literally what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to show ads on my pages completely free of charge, and you only have to pay me if somebody clicks on these ads. Right? You can see how that could go terribly, terribly wrong if you were a publisher. So you could show all the wrong ads, nobody clicks on them, and at the end of the quarter, you've made no money, right? Maybe you've doubled your page views, but the ads were all so bad that nobody clicked and you made no money. So what Google did is they said, well, we're going to introduce Quality Score as part of the ad rank formula. And if you look at, what is cost per click, it's dollars over clicks. And what's Quality Score? Effectively CTR, it's clicks divided by impressions. You multiply the two out, you find you're actually paying dollars per impression, which is effectively cost per mille, CPM. So Google did a brilliant thing. They maintained a CPM way for them to make money while giving advertisers a way to only pay for clicks and introducing the whole Quality Score or CTR mechanism. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense explained that way.
Yeah, that does. That makes a lot more sense. All right. So we have some people asking about Google's new updates that you discussed. Philip asked, he says, in the Quality Score announcement, Google specifically said it was reporting only, but you think it is affecting CPC? Question mark. How does that work? Question mark. Does that question make sense to you, Fred?
Yeah, it totally makes sense, and somebody else pointed that out on the blog post I did. And so yes, Google says it's a reporting only change, but I think the key thing that we're seeing is it's basically changing the reporting for some of the newer keywords, and so that tends to be some fraction of keywords in an account. And so a new keyword, like I said, is not just a keyword that you've just added, but it's a keyword with not enough data yet. And so Google seems to be assuming a different quality score for these newish keywords. And so for those newish keywords, you're paying different amounts of money. So the way that they judge them eventually remains the same, but we have seen some small fluctuations, both up and down in terms of CPCs in those accounts. Now, it's very hard to track that back to purely this quality score change. I mean, there's obviously other factors. There's, that we're getting into the back-to-school season. Maybe people are spending more money. They're coming back from vacation. So there's all these things that are very hard to measure in this situation. But we do believe that there is a little bit of a CPC impact as a result of this. And it's for those newish keywords, and this is the other interesting thing, like people should really take a look. Even if you have tens of thousands of keywords in your account, you will notice that only a small percentage of those tend to get impressions on any given day that are eligible for quality score calculations. And remember, it's eligible when it serves on Google search on either a mobile or a desktop device, or it could be a tablet too, so on any device, in the exact match variation. So a lot of people do kind of like these broader queries. And so, and that's one thing that we track in the optimizer tool. We show you how many keywords were served in that sort of exact match variation on Google search only. And so it's that small set of data that Google has, but it means that many keywords that we think have some history, in fact, from Google's perspective for quality score, have very little history, and it's still guessing as to what those starting quality scores may be.
How does Google's changes, if any, impact landing page, how they view landing pages? We're getting a lot of questions about landing page value in terms of quality score, and obviously that impacts click-through rate, which directly impacts quality score, but speak a little bit, if you can, specifically on landing pages.
Yeah, so landing pages always come up, right? And so in this specific change that Google made, there is no difference in how Google treats landing page quality. However, what they did say was the three subcomponents of quality scores, so the ad relevance, the landing page, and the expected click-through rate, they all now go to average. Now, I don't know too many advertisers who tend to start off with a below average landing page quality score. Or an above average landing page quality score, but if you found that you tended to be in one of those categories, then this would have again had a little bit of an impact, because now Google assumes every new keyword comes with an average landing page quality. And then as they get to those 100-ish impressions, now they actually use what they know about the interactions that happen with the landing pages. Kind of a follow-up question that I assume a lot of people have, because I get it quite frequently at conferences, is how does Google measure landing page relevance? You know, what could we look at? And basically think about the type of data Google might have through something like Google Analytics. And you have this data too, right? So it's about user experience. It's not about the content that's on the page, but it's how does a user perceive that content. For the folks who advertise on Bing, Bing has been very strict about making sure that whatever keyword you're advertising has to be present on the landing page. And they don't do it as much anymore as they used to, but that used to be a thing for them. With Google, that's not the case. Like, you could advertise a keyword and not have that keyword appear anywhere on the landing page, but it's still a very relevant page, because you know, your keyword could be flowers, your page could be about roses, and topically that's relevant, right? Maybe that's what people wanted to find, because maybe that's the most popular type of flower there is, you know, for buying. And so think about bounce rates and how long do people stay on my page, and do they seem to find what they're looking for. That's the kind of stuff Google would look at from a landing page quality perspective.
Interesting stuff. I think the landing page component of this is just my personal opinion, but is among the most interesting facets of all this, because it's something that Google obviously cares a great deal about, but it's not directly related to something on their platform. You know, it's really interesting that something is sort of removed as landing pages has such a dramatic impact. So, Fred, you're awesome, man. Thanks for doing this as usual. You're great. Any final thoughts before we close up shop here?
Yeah, I mean, so what you just said, right? It's, you know, I'm blanking, McKay. But so as far as
my comment was so good that it
your comment was so good,
mind.
And I was going to tie it back into like tracking conversions through phone calls.
Yes.
But yeah, so make sure that, because I think your landing page is one of the bigger levers in terms of making sure you hit your actual KPIs of CPA and return on ad spend. Right, so even if improving your landing page doesn't have that big of an impact to Google's quality score, it could have a dramatic impact on how much money you make, and hence how much money you can afford to pay for the next click. So make sure you're really doing conversion rate optimization and tracking all kinds of conversions, so not just sales, but also phone calls, signups for your newsletter, and then figure out what that's really worth, and then start optimizing against that, because that can be a huge impact on your business.
Great. Great. Fred, thank you, man. We appreciate it. And everybody, thank you for taking the time to attend today. We appreciate it as well. Watch for an email from Fred and I, not only with this recording, but also we're going to actually be partnering with Fred on another webinar in just a few days, where we're going to be talking a little bit about phone calls and some of the really interesting data we're pulling out of phone calls. So thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon and a great day. Bye-bye.